Blakely served for 2 years as the recovery czar for New Orleans following the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. He's just launched a book about his experiences in the job. It's called My Storm. There it is. Ed is also honorary professor in urban policy at the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. He joins me now. Welcome to the show. Now, I was just asking how long you were out here working for the urban policy, and you pointed out you're an Australian.
I am an Australian.
Australian citizen and all.
That's
how long have you lived here?
Well, I've lived in Mosman 10 years, on and off, in Australia 30.
How did they pluck you out of Mosman to go and help New Orleans?
Well, Mosman's a good place to come from. No, I had done a lot of recovery efforts elsewhere in the United States. Started
yes, the San Francisco earthquake.
And New York. And when I came back, this event occurred, and people in the States said, this is the guy to do it, because he's done all the others.
Okay, well, we'll start on this, because you've launched the book. It's your very personal experiences of what it was like. Just to get an idea, basically, when you got the job, you came in, you had no desk, no office, no mandate, and you were told just fix it.
Fix it.
Sounds like government.
Well, of course, it had happened before with other mayors, but New Orleans was in very bad shape. The government was very weak. The government basically was almost bankrupt. They cut 3/4 of the staff. So I wasn't the only one adrift in New Orleans, and the city was going downhill. So it wasn't just the storm. There were a lot of things wrong with New Orleans.
In the book you seem happy with what you achieved, but not everybody thinks it's been great, that it's been slower than it should. I mean, looking back now, 5 years later, where is New Orleans, and what could you have done better, and what are you pleased with?
Well, New Orleans is in very good shape. They'll be hosting the Super Bowl in a year. The New Orleans downtown looks better than it ever looked. Most of the housing is back in the places where you could rebuild. The city street structures and so forth, the city's has better leadership, and it's going in good directions. So New Orleans is in very good shape.
Yet there's a lot of it that hasn't been rebuilt. That's
well, maybe. Let's take a look at that. There's a lot that isn't rebuilt because those are places that had fallen down well before the storm, and the owners have not chosen to fix those places up. But there are areas maybe there shouldn't be any building, and that's a lesson for us here. You shouldn't rebuild everything. There are places in the Ninth Ward and so forth that have been inundated by floods 6 or 7 times. When do you stop? When do you relook? And so one of the things we did, and I'm very proud of this, was gave people options to move out of those areas into safer areas, and more than 70% of them took advantage of that.
Well, I was going to ask you that, what lessons they are, having just been through floods twice in a row for Queensland. People, after their initial sympathy wears off, they say, well, hold on, why are you building on these floodplains?
That is a very good question.
Do you see parallels with what happened in Queensland?
Most certainly do. Because building back someplace makes sense. Building back there doesn't. And this is compounded in Queensland, as it was in New Orleans, by us building these houses right on the ground, flat, water runs right through them, fills up the creeks, and so on. The old Queenslanders were much smarter.
On stilts.
That's
so back to the old style.
Back to the old style in New Orleans as well. But we've also paved over the creeks. You know, we try to make sure that people can move around easier by paving those creeks. They're still there. They're just underground. When the rain comes, they come up out of the ground. That cement makes the water move faster, and you've got a big problem on your hands.
What about the Brisbane CBD? It was underwater for the 2nd time in a generation. Should we just move the CBD, maybe? A lot of people would argue you wouldn't miss it.
No, I don't think we should move the CBD. But what about that big freeway that's on the edge of the CBD? Maybe that should be moved. And maybe we should do things upstream so that the water doesn't come down as much. And of course, we know now you should let the water out of the Wivenhoe Dam a little bit earlier and the like. But we have had more than a century of flooding in Brisbane, and we've learned very little from it.
So is it that politicians don't have the will, or is it, I sometimes worry, is it just people are greedy and they want to buy the cheap land where, even if it's prone to flooding, they think, never happen.
Isn't there a combination here? The government gives you the permit. Why does the government give you the permit?
They should be tougher on it. Well, they're greedy too, aren't they?
Well, yes, in the sense that I want to get a vote. Where's the vote come from? The person that wants to own a home. If I can get a person a home, they'll vote for me, and maybe I'll be out of office when the flood comes.
You've made a controversial assertion that you thought New Orleans itself might be around in 100 years' time. Could you say the same about Brisbane?
Well, I don't know about Brisbane. I think Brisbane will be around, but I think there'll be some structural readjustments. I think there'll be some necessary structural readjustments.
Do you think New Orleans will be around, or is it just inevitable? It's just
inevitable.
It can't survive.
The New Orleans, the Mississippi River on one side, the Gulf of Mexico on the other side, the hurricanes, the lakes. You've got to move New Orleans to be here.
Okay, New Orleans, no. Brisbane, maybe. Tell us where the rest of our cities are looking. You're an urban policy, world-renowned urban policy expert. What are we going to see? What are the big trends for urban policy?
Well, the biggest trend, I think, is the whole issue of density. That we have sprawled out across marshlands, as New Orleans did, across lands that animals lived on, and now we're going to have to claw some of that back for us to survive. So we're going to have to come back. When I say density, I'm not talking about height. I'm talking about Paddington type density, which is a very dense place, but it's not tall. So we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more attention to the natural resources and where things are, because nature is clawing back. 600 years we had very calm weather. It's changing. It may go on for another 200 years, and we will not be able to live in certain places.
Well, how do we adjust in a city like, say, Sydney or Melbourne, where you've got this demand, people flooding in, they all want to live in the cities? It's a constant battle, isn't it?
Well, I think there are two things we can do. One of them is we should use the land in the city a lot better than we're using it now. Okay, that could accommodate a little more people. Just think of Parramatta Road. You could accommodate 250,000 people in Parramatta.
Go higher, you're saying?
Not necessarily go higher, just clean it up. All right? Put the tunnel through, finish that tunnel
Better planning, you're
Better
saying.
planning all around. That's a couple of 100,000 people. We can make Newcastle and Wollongong better places, nodes like many cities in the United States. So I think we should make a nodal move rather than a spread move. And this is something
Well, Melbourne's a spread city, isn't it?
Melbourne is a spread city. But Melbourne has to make Geelong a stronger place, and all those nodal cities have to be made stronger. I think they have the right idea in Adelaide. They're doing that. You know, they're making the strong nodes and a strong center, and that's the direction we're going to go in the future. I think we're going to have to move away from the coast in some of our coastal communities.
That's because of the climate change
Because of the climate change issue, and even if it weren't climate change, we're falling into the sea. So you have to get smart pretty soon.
We have to stop that, as we've said,
right.
Underwater. Thank you very much, Ed Blakely. You're Professor in Urban Policies at the US Studies Centre, University of Sydney, and the book is called My Storm, his personal experience of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and obviously Queenslanders and everybody else will be interested in that.